Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. I'm Billy, 34. I've been married to Molly, 32, for the last 9 years, and we've been together since college. Our marriage has been solid, or at least I thought it was. We have a house we love, 2 beautiful kids, and a life we've built together through hard work and love. I always believed we were a team. But 2 months ago, Molly came to me with something that flipped my world upside down. She told me she felt like she missed out on her youth because she didn't have many romantic or sexual experiences before we met. At first, I didn't even understand what she was saying. It sounded like she was blaming our marriage for something I didn't even know she regretted. And then she said the words that still echo in my head every night. I want your permission to sleep with someone else. Just once. I was stunned. Speechless. It felt like a betrayal right there, even though she hadn't done anything yet. We've always talked about how trust and respect are the foundation of our marriage. And now, it was like she was throwing all of that out the window because of some midlife crisis or whatever. I asked her why she felt this way, what I'd done wrong, and why she couldn't work through these feelings with me instead of looking outside our marriage. She said it wasn't about me, that she loves me and still wants to spend her life with me, but she needs to explore this part of herself so she can feel whole. She swore it wasn't about anyone specific, just a what if she couldn't shake. It felt like a slap in the face. Like I wasn't enough. I tried to tell her how much this hurt me, but she kept spinning it back, saying this was about her personal growth, not me. But how can I not take it personally? She's asking to break the vows we made to each other. I've been walking around in a fog ever since. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm already losing her, even though she's still here. Part of me wants to tell her no flat out, but another part of me is scared she'll just go behind my back if I don't agree. I've always thought we had a good marriage. We're not perfect, but we love each other, or at least I thought we did. But now I don't know. I don't know who she is anymore. After our initial conversation, things between Molly and me were tense. We avoided talking about it directly, but the air in the house felt heavy, like neither of us could breathe. I didn't know how to process what she said, and it felt like Molly was waiting for me to come around, like this was just a phase I needed to get through. A week later, I decided to bring it up. I couldn't stand the silence. Molly, I said, sitting her down at the kitchen table, I can't stop thinking about what you said. You're asking me for something I don't know how to give. I love you, and this feels like you're throwing that away. She looked at me, her face calm but her words cutting. Billy, I'm not throwing anything away. I told you I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. This is just one thing I need for myself. To close a chapter one never got to open. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How is that fair to me? To us? Do you even care what this is doing to me? Her expression hardened, and she folded her arms. It's not about fairness. It's about my happiness. I've sacrificed a lot for this family, Billy. I've put everyone else first for years, and now I'm asking for this one thing. Sacrificed? The word hit me like a punch. I thought we'd been building this life together, but the way she talked about it, it was like she'd been carrying a weight I never saw. We argued for hours, going in circles. I begged her to reconsider, to think about what this would do to our marriage, to our kids. She kept saying it wouldn't change anything, that it was just a one-time thing, like it was some checkbox she needed to tick off. Finally, I said something I hadn't planned to say. Molly, if you go through with this, I don't think I can stay married to you. She froze, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she might backtrack. But instead she whispered, I'm sorry you feel that way. Then she got up and left the room. That was the first night I slept on the couch. After that argument, Molly and I barely spoke. When we did, it was short, clipped sentences about the kids, groceries, or what needed to get done around the house. I could feel the gap between us widening, and it killed me. I didn't know how to fix something when the other person didn't even see it as broken. About 2 weeks later, Molly told me she was going out for a girls' night. She'd been doing that more lately, going out with friends I didn't know much about or didn't remember her mentioning before. It felt off, but I didn't want to seem controlling or paranoid. Who's going? I asked, trying to sound casual. Just some old friends, she said, not meeting my eyes. You don't know them. I don't know what made me press further, but I did. Molly, is this really just a girls' night? Or is this about? I couldn't even finish the sentence. She sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. Billy, I told you. I haven't done anything. And I won't, unless you say it's okay. I just need some time to think, to clear my head. Her words didn't sit right, but I didn't have it in me to fight. Fine, I said. Go have your night. She kissed me on the cheek, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like she might actually mean it. But as I watched her leave, something in my gut told me she wasn't just meeting friends. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Was she already cheating? Was this the start of something I couldn't stop? Around midnight, I grabbed my phone and opened her location-sharing app, something we'd set up years ago for emergencies. I stared at the screen, torn between respecting her privacy and needing answers. Finally, I tapped it. Her location popped up, and she wasn't at a bar or restaurant. She was at an apartment complex across town. My heart sank. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe she was visiting a friend, or maybe she just needed space and didn't want to tell me. But deep down I knew. When she came home, I was still awake, sitting in the dark living room. She walked in, startled to see me. "Billy, you're up," she asked, her tone light, like nothing was wrong. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How was your night?" "It was fine," she said quickly, setting her purse down and avoiding my eyes. "Just hung out, talked about life, you know." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Molly, where were you?" Her head snapped up, her face going pale. "What do you mean?" "I told you I was with friends." "Friends at an apartment complex?" I shot back, my voice rising. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right lie. "Billy, it's not what you think. I swear. I went to see someone to talk. That's all. To talk." I said, standing up. "You went to some guy's apartment in the middle of the night to talk? Do you hear yourself?" She started to cry, but it didn't feel real. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're making this into something it's not." But I didn't believe her. And that night, I knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Molly avoided me, and I didn't have it in me to chase her for answers anymore. I busied myself with the kids and tried to focus on anything but the gnawing feeling in my chest. But that silence didn't last long. Around noon, Molly came into the living room, her face puffy from crying. She sat down across from me and started wringing her hands. "We need to talk," she said softly. I put down the book I wasn't actually reading and waited. "I need to be honest with you," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid of how you'd react. But I went to see someone last night." My stomach dropped, even though I already knew. "Who?" I asked, my voice sharp. She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "A guy I met through a friend. His name's Aaron." "Aaron," I repeated, the name tasting bitter. "And why were you at Aaron's place?" She looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. "To talk. Just to talk. I needed someone to help me sort out my feelings, someone who wasn't involved in this." I let out a bitter laugh. "So you couldn't talk to me, your husband, the person this directly affects? You had to go to some stranger's apartment for that." She flinched but didn't back down. "You don't understand, Billy. I feel trapped. I feel like I'm suffocating in this life. I needed an outside perspective." Her words stung more than I expected. "Suffocating? Trapped? This life we built together, you're calling it a prison now." "No," she said quickly, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. "It's not like that. I love you. I love our family. But I've lost myself somewhere along the way, and I'm just trying to find her again." I stood up, pacing the room because I couldn't sit still. "And you think the answer to that is another man? Molly, this isn't about finding yourself. This is about you looking for an excuse to do something you know is wrong." She didn't deny it. She just sat there, crying into her hands. Finally, I asked the question I didn't want to know the answer to. "Did anything happen?" "No," she said firmly, looking up at me. "I swear, Billy. I haven't done anything. I just talked to him, that's all." But after last night, her words didn't hold any weight. Trust is a fragile thing, and hers was already shattered. That night, I stayed in the guest room again, unable to face her. I wanted to believe her, but everything about her story felt wrong. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The next few days were unbearable. Molly and I spoke even less than before, and when we did, it felt forced, like we were strangers trying to coexist. Every time I looked at her, I saw someone I didn't recognize, a woman who could ask for something so destructive and still act like it was normal. But the worst part was the waiting. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, just waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. One evening, Molly came home late again. This time, she didn't offer any explanations, and I didn't ask. I was too tired of fighting, too tired of trying to figure out where her head was. But I couldn't stop myself from checking her phone when she went to shower. I know it wasn't the right thing to do, but trust was already gone, and I needed answers. There were texts from Aaron. They weren't outright damning, but they were enough to make my stomach churn. Aaron, I'm glad you opened up to me. You deserve to feel happy. Molly, thank you for listening. It means a lot. Aaron, I'm here for you always. You know that, right? And then the one that hit like a freight train. Molly, I don't know what I'd do without you right now. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. She hadn't admitted to anything physical, but the emotional connection was clear. She was leaning on him, confiding in him, while leaving me in the dark. When she came out of the shower, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone still in my hand. What's this? I asked, holding up the screen. Her face drained of color. Billy, why are you looking through my phone? That's what you're worried about? I shot back. Not the fact that you're texting this guy like he's your lifeline? Like he's the person you're supposed to be turning to. She crossed her arms, her voice defensive. I told you, Aaron is just a friend. He's been helping me figure things out. Helping you figure out how to destroy our marriage. I yelled, standing up. You don't even see what you're doing, do you? You're replacing me, Molly. You're pushing me out of your life piece by piece. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, silent, tears streaming down her face. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at a motel. I couldn't be in the same house as her, not after seeing those texts. I felt like a fool, like I'd been trying to save something that was already gone. I spent the night at a rundown motel, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything in my mind. Every word, every moment Molly and I shared, felt tainted now. I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that nothing physical had happened, but those texts were like daggers. The next morning, I called out of work and sat in the parking lot of a diner, trying to make sense of my next move. Do I confront her again? Do I leave for good? Or do I just let it play out and hope she wakes up from whatever this is? I didn't have answers, so I went home. When I walked in, Molly was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. Billy, she said softly, I'm glad you're home. I dropped my bag by the door and leaned against the wall. I'm not here to pretend everything's fine, I said. I just want to know the truth. All of it. She nodded, tears already welling in her eyes. You deserve that. Then she said it. I slept with him. The words hit like a physical blow, and for a second, I thought I might actually pass out. My ears were ringing, and my chest felt like it was caving in. When? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 2 nights ago, she admitted. After we fought, I felt so lost. I went to Aaron's, and one thing led to another. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. You mean to tell me you didn't feel lost? You made a choice, Molly. You chose him. It wasn't like that, she cried, standing up. It didn't mean anything. I thought it would help me figure things out, but it didn't. It was a mistake, one I'll regret for the rest of my life. I spun around to face her, anger boiling over. You thought cheating on me would help you figure things out? Do you even hear yourself? This isn't a mistake, Molly. This is who you've decided to be. She tried to come closer, but I held up my hand to stop her. Don't come near me. Billy, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I love you. I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I shook my head, grabbing my bag. I don't think you even know what love is anymore. And with that, I walked out. That was the first time I truly felt like our marriage was over. After I left the house, I didn't go back to the motel. Instead, I drove to my buddy Kevin's place. He's one of those friends who's always there when things go sideways, no questions asked. When I knocked on his door and he saw my face, he didn't say a word. Just stepped aside and let me in. We sat in his living room, beer in hand, while I told him everything. Every word felt like ripping off a bandage, exposing wounds I wasn't ready to face. "Man, that's brutal," Kevin said, shaking his head. "I don't know how you're even holding it together right now." "I'm not," I admitted. "I feel like my whole life just collapsed. The house, the kids, everything we built, it's all tied to her. How am I supposed to come back from this?" Kevin didn't have an answer, and I didn't expect him to. But just saying it out loud helped, even if only a little. The next day, I called Molly. I didn't want to talk to her, but we had kids to think about. I told her I needed some time and space, and for now, I'd stay at Kevin's. "What about the kids?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I'll come by to see them, but I'm not staying in the house," I said firmly. "And don't try to spin this into something it's not. This is because of you, Molly." There was a long silence before she whispered, "I understand." Later that week, I met with a lawyer. It felt surreal sitting in that office, talking about dividing up our life like it was a business transaction. I wasn't sure if I wanted to file for divorce yet, but I needed to understand my options. The lawyer was blunt, which I appreciated. She told me what I'd be looking at financially, how custody might play out, and what steps to take if things escalated. As I left her office, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and this strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a sliver of control. Molly started texting me after that, begging me to come home so we could talk. She said all the things I used to want to hear, that she was sorry, that she loved me, that she'd do anything to fix what she'd broken. But it all felt hollow. Words mean nothing when the actions behind them say something else entirely. A week later, I went to the house to see the kids. Molly was there, of course, and the tension between us was thick. The kids were too young to understand what was happening, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They knew something was wrong. After they went to bed, Molly cornered me in the kitchen. "Billy, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We can fix this. I know I messed up, but I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar pull of love or hope. I just felt tired. "You already gave up on us, Molly," I said quietly. "I'm just following your lead." She burst into tears, but I didn't comfort her this time. I couldn't. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. After that night at the house, I decided to take a step back from everything. I needed clarity, and being around Molly wasn't helping. I started focusing on the kids, spending time with them outside the house, at the park, grabbing ice cream, or just walking around the neighborhood. It was heartbreaking, though. They'd ask questions I didn't know how to answer. "Daddy, why don't you sleep here anymore?" my daughter asked one day, her big, curious eyes looking up at me. I froze. How do you explain something like this to a 5-year-old? "It's complicated, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "But no matter what, I love you and your brother more than anything. That'll never change." She nodded, seeming to accept that, but it killed me inside. I hated that Molly's decisions were forcing them to grow up faster than they should. Molly kept texting and calling. Some days, she sounded desperate, apologizing over and over, promising she'd do whatever it took to fix things. Other days, she was cold and defensive, accusing me of abandoning the family. "Do you even care about us anymore?" she snapped during one call. "Don't turn this around on me, Molly," I said, my voice firm. "You made this choice. You don't get to act like I'm the one walking away." Her tone softened instantly. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to handle this, Billy. I hate what I've done. I hate what I've become." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to see the woman I fell in love with. But the other part of me, the part that was growing stronger every day, knew it didn't matter anymore. A few days later, I started therapy. I'd always been skeptical about it, but I needed help sorting through the mess in my head. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was straightforward but kind. "This isn't just about what Molly did," she said during one session. "It's about how you process it and how you move forward. What do you want, Billy?" I didn't have an answer right away. For so long, my focus had been on saving my marriage, keeping the family together. But now? I wasn't sure. I just want peace, I finally said. That's when I started taking steps to create that peace. I told Molly I wanted a separation, officially. She cried, begged me to reconsider, but I stood firm. This isn't about punishment, I told her. It's about giving us both space to figure out what's next. But I'm telling you now, Molly. I don't see a way back from this. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered Aaron, the texts, the lies, the betrayal. And I stayed strong. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. I was starting to let go. Moving into the apartment was both a relief and a reminder of everything I'd lost. The silence was heavy, and at first, it felt like a punishment. But as the days passed, I started finding comfort in it. No arguments, no lies, no pretending. Just me and my thoughts. I focused on keeping a routine. Work, hitting the gym, spending time with the kids when it was my turn. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Molly, however, didn't make it easy. She was relentless with the calls and texts. Some were apologetic, others angry, and a few were just desperate. One night, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to see her standing there, her eyes red and puffy. "Billy, please," she said, clutching the strap of her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. "I can't do this without you." I stepped aside, letting her in, though part of me wanted to slam the door in her face. She sat on the edge of my couch, looking around like she was seeing how much of a life I'd built without her. "I've been going to therapy," she said, breaking the silence. "And I've been reading about what I can do to fix this." "That's good," I said flatly, staying by the door. She looked up at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Billy, I'll do anything. I'll cut Aaron out of my life completely. I'll go to counseling with you. I'll sign whatever you want. Just please, don't give up on us." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Molly, I'm glad you're trying to work on yourself. But this isn't something you can fix with a checklist. You broke us. You broke me. And I don't know if I can come back from that." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might argue. But instead, she just nodded, standing up. "I'm not giving up," she said quietly. "I'll keep fighting for us, even if you won't." I didn't respond as she walked out, closing the door behind her. After she left, I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd been. A small part of me wanted to believe her, that she could change, that we could rebuild what we had. But the bigger part of me knew the truth. Some things can't be undone. The next day, I called my lawyer. It was time to file for divorce. Filing for divorce felt like closing the final chapter of a book I didn't want to end. Sitting in the lawyer's office again, signing those papers, I couldn't shake the weight of it all. This wasn't how my life was supposed to go. I'd always pictured Molly and me growing old together, watching our kids grow up, and one day sitting on the porch, reminiscing about the life we built. Now I was untangling that life, piece by piece. When Molly was served the papers, she called me immediately. "Billy," she said, her voice breaking. "You filed." "Yes," I said simply, trying to keep my voice steady. "How could you do this?" she cried. "I thought we were going to work on things." "No, Molly," I said, my voice firm but calm. "You thought that. I've been clear from the start. I don't see a way back from this. Filing for divorce doesn't mean I hate you, but it means I've accepted that our marriage is over." She was silent for a long time before whispering, "I don't know how to do this without you, Billy. I don't know how to be alone." Her words hit me, but not in the way she probably intended. They didn't make me feel guilty or tempted to stay. They just made me sad. Sad for the woman who was once my partner, who had become someone I barely recognized. "You're stronger than you think," I said, surprising even myself with the kindness in my voice. "You'll figure it out. But I can't be the one to help you anymore." She cried softly for a while before hanging up. Over the next few weeks, things were tense. Molly tried to keep up appearances for the kids, but it was clear she was struggling. She'd text me randomly, sometimes asking about the kids, other times sending long paragraphs about how sorry she was and how much she missed me. I tried to keep my responses brief and neutral. I wasn't interested in rekindling anything, but I also didn't want to make things worse. One night, Molly sent a text that stopped me in my tracks. "I broke things off with Aaron. I told him I never want to see him again. I stared at my phone for a long time, my emotions swirling. Relief? Closure? It was hard to pin down. Finally, I just responded, "Good. That's the right thing to do." She didn't reply, and I didn't follow up. Around the same time, I started spending more time with the kids. I picked them up from school, helped them with homework, and took them to the park. It was exhausting but grounding. They were my anchor in this storm. One day, while I was helping my son with his math homework, he looked up at me and said, "I like it when it's just us, Dad. You seem happier." It caught me off guard, but he wasn't wrong. Without the constant stress of Molly's lies and the tension in the house, I did feel lighter. A month after filing, Molly and I met to discuss custody arrangements. We sat across from each other in a small conference room, our lawyers present. She looked worn down, her eyes tired, her posture slouched. It was a far cry from the confident, vibrant woman I married. "I want what's best for the kids," she said, her voice quiet. "I don't want to fight you on this." Her words surprised me, but I appreciated them. We agreed to a joint custody arrangement, with the kids splitting their time between us. It wasn't ideal, but it was fair. As we wrapped up the meeting, Molly stopped me outside the room. "Billy," she said hesitantly, "do you think we'll ever be able to be friends again? For the kids?" I paused, considering her words. "Maybe someday," I said honestly. "But right now I just need space." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand." Driving home that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, even a little hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for a future where I could truly move on. For the first time in a long time, it felt like that future might actually be within reach. The first few weeks after the custody arrangement were a whirlwind. It felt strange waking up in my quiet apartment, knowing the kids weren't there half the time. I'd hear phantom sounds, laughter, little footsteps, and realize it was just my mind playing tricks on me. When the kids were with me, it was chaos in the best way. We played board games, built blanket forts, and cooked dinners that usually ended with flour on the floor and spaghetti sauce on the ceiling. Those moments reminded me why I was fighting so hard to keep it together, for them. But even in those happy moments, the weight of everything lingered. Molly was trying, I'll give her that. She kept things civil, sticking to the schedule and keeping conversations about the kids. But every now and then, she'd sneak in a comment or a look that told me she was still holding out hope. One day, during a drop-off, she lingered at the door. "Billy," she started, her voice soft, "how are you doing?" "Really?" I hesitated. I didn't want to give her false hope, but I also didn't want to be cruel. "I'm doing okay," I said. "Just trying to focus on the kids and figure things out." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I'm glad. I want you to know I'm still working on myself. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm trying to be better." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I married. But it wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Molly," I said gently, before closing the door. That night, I sat alone in the apartment, thinking about her words. It was hard not to wonder if things could have been different. If she'd come to me before all of this, if she'd been honest from the start, maybe we wouldn't be here. But the truth is, we were here, and there was no going back. About a month after the custody arrangement started, I got a call from Molly. "Billy, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaky. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "Aaron, he reached out to me," she admitted. "He wanted to talk, but I told him no. I blocked his number. I thought you should know." I let out a long breath. "Why are you telling me this, Molly?" "Because I don't want there to be any more secrets," she said. "I know I've lost your trust, but I want you to see that I'm trying." Her words felt sincere, but I wasn't sure what she expected from me. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. She hesitated, like she wanted to say more, but eventually she just said, "Good night, Billy," and hung up. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing little changes in myself. The heaviness in my chest wasn't as constant, and I found myself smiling more, real smiles, not the forced kind I'd been wearing for months. One evening, I took the kids out for pizza, and as I watched them argue over toppings and laugh at each other's silly faces, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. It wasn't perfect, and I still had bad days. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was moving forward. Molly still tried to reach out now and then, but I kept my boundaries firm. I wasn't ready to be her friend, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. For now, I was focusing on what mattered most: my kids, my healing, and the life I was slowly rebuilding. With the divorce process underway, my life began to settle into a rhythm. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was mine, and I was learning to embrace it. I kept busy with work, dove into new hobbies, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen much during the marriage. Kevin, my go-to guy, introduced me to a weekly trivia night at a local bar. It was a small thing, but for a few hours each week, I felt like my old self again. And the kids, they were my light. They seemed to be adjusting better than I expected. They loved their time with me, and I made sure to make every moment count. One day, while playing in the park, my daughter climbed up beside me on the bench. "Daddy," she said, tilting her head the way she always did when she was thinking. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "You smile more now. And you don't look sad like before." Her observation hit me harder than I thought it would. "I'm getting there," I said, pulling her close. "I'm happier when I'm with you and your brother." She grinned, satisfied with my answer, and ran back to the swings. Molly, meanwhile, kept reaching out. She texted me updates about the kids when they were with her, sent photos of their crafts or little milestones. It wasn't necessary, our custody arrangement was clear, but I think she was trying to stay connected in any way she could. I kept my responses polite but distant. I didn't want to encourage anything beyond co-parenting. One evening, she called out of the blue. "Billy, I've been thinking a lot," she said, her voice hesitant. "About everything. About us. And I just want to say I'm sorry again, for all of it." I sighed, leaning back against my couch. "Molly, we've been through this. I've heard your apologies, and I believe you mean them. But it doesn't change what happened." "I know," she said quickly. I've been working on myself. I've been in therapy, and it's helped me see how much I took you for granted. I wasn't fair to you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." There was a time when those words would have mattered. But now? They felt too late. "I appreciate you saying that," I said after a long pause. "But Molly, we're past that now. My focus is on the kids and moving forward." Her silence was heavy, and I could feel her disappointment through the phone. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just hope one day we can have some kind of relationship, for the kids' sake." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. "But right now, I need space. You need to focus on yourself, and I need to do the same." She didn't argue, and we ended the call on a surprisingly calm note. A few days later, I was at the grocery store when I bumped into someone from our old social circle, a woman named Rachel. She was someone Molly and I used to hang out with at parties, though we'd never been close. "Billy," she said, surprised. "Wow, it's been forever. How are you?" "I'm good," I said, unsure how much to share. She smiled kindly. "I heard about everything. I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that." Her words caught me off guard. "Thanks. That means a lot." We chatted for a bit, mostly small talk, before she handed me her number. "If you ever want to grab coffee or just talk, let me know. You've been through a lot, and I know how isolating that can be." I wasn't sure if I'd call her, but the gesture felt nice. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me, not just the guy who got cheated on or the guy going through a divorce. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at Rachel's number. I wasn't ready to dive into anything new, but the thought of letting someone else in, even just as a friend, didn't feel as impossible as it had before. I wasn't fully healed, and I knew I still had a long way to go. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was taking steps in the right direction. Life didn't magically get easier after the divorce papers were filed, but I started noticing small changes that felt like progress. The days didn't feel as heavy, and I wasn't carrying the same weight of anger and sadness everywhere I went. It wasn't that I'd forgotten what happened, far from it, but I was learning to live with it. The kids were a huge part of that. They were my reason to keep going, my anchor in the chaos. Every laugh, every silly story, every "Dad, watch this" moment reminded me that I still had so much to be grateful for. One evening, while tucking my daughter in, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I like it when we're together. It feels like home." It was such a simple thing, but it hit me hard. I'd spent so long feeling like I'd lost my sense of home, but maybe I hadn't. Maybe it was just different now. Molly, on the other hand, was still trying to reach out. She sent long messages about how therapy was helping her, about how she was reflecting on her mistakes, and about how much she missed me. I kept my responses polite and focused on the kids, not wanting to give her any hope that reconciliation was possible. But there were moments when her words crept into my mind, making me wonder if I was being too harsh. Then I'd remember Aaron, the betrayal, the lies, and the hollow apologies in the aftermath. It wasn't about being harsh, it was about protecting myself. I started seeing Rachel more often, though it wasn't anything serious. We grabbed coffee a couple of times, talked about life, and shared stories about the past. She was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was seeing me for who I was, not who I used to be with Molly. She didn't push for anything romantic, and I appreciated that. Just having someone to share a conversation with, someone who wasn't tied to the weight of my marriage, was enough. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Molly's, I drove to a nearby park and sat on a bench, watching the sun set over the trees. The quiet felt good, soothing in a way it hadn't before. I thought about everything, how far I'd come, how much further I still had to go. For the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It just felt like a journey I was starting to understand. Molly texted me that night, thanking me for being patient with her during all of this. I stared at the message for a while before responding with something simple. I'm doing this for the kids. They deserve the best version of us. She didn't reply after that, and I was glad. I didn't want to drag things out with long conversations that led nowhere. In therapy, Dr. Patel asked me how I was handling the idea of forgiveness. The question caught me off guard, and I told her I didn't think I'd ever forgive Molly. Not fully, anyway. But then she asked if forgiveness was really for Molly or if it was for me. The thought stuck with me. Maybe forgiving Molly wasn't about absolving her or pretending everything was okay. Maybe it was about letting go of the anger that still lingered in the corners of my mind. The next weekend, while I was with the kids, we spent the day at the zoo. My son wanted to see the lions, and my daughter insisted on riding the little train that circled the park twice. By the end of the day, we were all exhausted, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from making memories. As we walked to the car, hand in hand, I realized something. I was happy. Not perfectly, not completely, but in that moment, I felt whole. When I dropped them off at Molly's that night, she came out to the car to say hello. She looked at me like she wanted to say more, but all she said was, "Thank you for being such a good dad to them." I nodded. They deserve nothing less. Driving away, I didn't feel the usual pang of anger or sadness that followed our interactions. I felt nothing. And for the first time, that felt like a victory. The past was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. I wasn't carrying it anymore, I was just walking beside it, learning to move forward one step at a time. Time moved forward, and so did I. The routines I'd built started to feel like second nature, and the weight of the past grew lighter. I didn't notice the exact moment it happened, but one day, I realized Molly wasn't on my mind as much. She was still there, a part of my story, but she didn't control it anymore. The kids continued to thrive, their laughter filling the spaces that once felt hollow. They talked about their lives at school, their friends, their dreams. Watching them grow reminded me that life kept going, even when it felt like everything had fallen apart. Molly tried less and less to reach out about anything beyond co-parenting. I think she finally understood that I wasn't coming back. One evening after a custody exchange, she looked at me and said, "You seem happy." "I am," I said honestly. And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. I still went to therapy, still worked on myself, but I wasn't chasing closure anymore. Instead, I was finding it in small moments: a quiet evening with the kids, a walk through the park, a conversation with a friend. One night, I sat on the couch after the kids were asleep, flipping through old photos on my phone. There were pictures of vacations, birthdays, and milestones we'd celebrated as a family. I expected the familiar pang of sadness to hit, but it didn't. Instead, I smiled, grateful for the good memories we'd shared, even if the ending wasn't what I wanted. Closure, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting. And I was finally there. Months passed, and life slowly began to feel normal, not the normal I had before, but a new kind of normal that I'd built for myself and the kids. I didn't feel the constant weight of what had happened. It wasn't gone entirely, but it had faded into the background, a quiet reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. The kids were thriving, which was my biggest win. They adjusted better than I could have hoped, and our time together was filled with laughter and love. They asked less and less about why things had changed, accepting the way life was now. It felt like I'd done something right for them, even if I doubted myself constantly in other areas. One weekend, we decided to bake cookies, an ambitious task, given that neither of us had any real baking skills. My son spilled half the flour on the counter, and my daughter accidentally put in a tablespoon of salt instead of sugar. By the time we finished, the kitchen was a disaster, and the cookies were barely edible. But it didn't matter. We laughed so hard we cried, and as I sat there, surrounded by my kids and their flour-dusted faces, I realized I hadn't thought about Molly at all that day. Molly and I kept things civil, though we rarely spoke beyond co-parenting logistics. She'd stopped trying to fix things between us, which was a relief. Instead, she focused on the kids and her own journey. I could tell she was trying. She seemed calmer, more grounded, but it didn't change how I felt. One evening, while dropping the kids off, she stopped me at the door. "Billy," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" I hesitated, unsure of where this was going, but nodded. "Do you think I'll ever forgive myself for what I did to us?" Her voice was small, her eyes filled with regret. The question caught me off guard. I didn't have an easy answer for her, but after a moment I said, "That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But I do think forgiveness starts with owning what happened and making peace with it. For your sake, not anyone else's." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and I could tell she wasn't expecting my kindness. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of closure, not just for her, but for myself. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't love her either. I just let her go. Around this time, I started reconnecting with parts of myself I'd neglected for years. I picked up hobbies I used to love, reading, woodworking, even hiking. On weekends when the kids were with Molly, I explored trails I hadn't visited since college. It was therapeutic, being alone in nature, surrounded by the quiet. One day while hiking, I ran into Rachel. She was there with a group of friends, but when she saw me, she waved and came over to say hi. "Billy." "Small world," she said, smiling brightly. We chatted for a bit, and before she left, she invited me to join her group for coffee afterward. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was ready to mix my healing journey with anything social. But something about the way she smiled made me say yes. Over coffee, we talked about everything: life, work, the absurdity of adulthood. It was easy, effortless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was just living instead of surviving. A few weeks later, Rachel and I went on a proper coffee date. I was nervous, but she made it easy. We talked for hours, and when we said goodbye, I realized I was actually looking forward to seeing her again. It wasn't about replacing Molly or rushing into anything. It was about rediscovering parts of myself I thought were gone. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch and reflected on everything. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the endless nights of questioning everything. It all felt like a lifetime ago. I wasn't the same person I was before it happened, but that wasn't a bad thing.